Why do so many people generate CO2 by shouting about CO2? To not quote Dr. Seuss, what is CO2 and what does it do? CO2 is the chemical name for carbon dioxide, and it's a gas in our atmosphere. In the mid-1890s, a Swedish physicist asked himself a simple question: why is Stockholm hotter than the surrounding countryside? The surrounding area receives as much sunlight as the city, the wood stoves are inside, and the coal burning takes place inside buildings as well. The only difference he could see was the city had airborne pollution, whereas the country did not. We see this phenomenon in modern cities. Outside the city limits, we'll see snow, but once we get close to the city, it's raining. Our physicists assumed it must be due to pollution. But what is pollution? Pollution in this case are the products of combustion, and the products of combustion are H2O and CO2. Basically water vapor and carbon dioxide. Since he didn't notice hot, steamy water vapor, he assumed CO2 must be the cause. But CO2 doesn't really react with air in any way. How can it be responsible? Faced with this question, he then proceeded to perform the act that all scientists live for. He created an experiment. His experiment was to build two identical sealable boxes, place a thermometer in each, and add an intake port where he could introduce CO2 to each box. He added a little CO2. Nothing happened until the sun came up. The box with the extra CO2 was hotter than the control box. Why? He didn't know. So he added more CO2 in small steps and wrote down the results. He swapped boxes and got the same results. When he plotted temperature rise versus CO2 concentration, he then knew what form the equation linking the two would take. He used this equation to calculate that increasing CO2 output by 2.5 to 3 times would cause a 8 or 9 degree temperature rise in the Arctic. At the time, the world was producing less than 7 billion tons of CO2 per year. We now generate 35 billion tons per year. If the scientists at the time had an internet to help them, they would have known that two researchers, one in England and one in America, had discovered that CO2 absorbs infrared wavelengths of sunlight very efficiently. We can't see infrared. We feel it as heat. Carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane are affected by infrared in the same way, and for that reason they're called greenhouse gases. So why do we care? Let's look at 3 theories. Higher temperatures would cause the ice sitting on top of the Arctic, Antarctic, and Greenland to melt. We're already seeing this. Number 2, higher temperatures would cause more frequent and more energetic storms. We're not seeing this. Semi-arid areas would become arid areas. We're not seeing this happening either. We're seeing more vegetation, not less. So let's look at number 1. The water levels in various seaports around the world have been recorded for several thousand years. In many of the oldest ports, earthquakes, however, have moved the original markings, making them unreliable. We do have tide gauge data from the late 1800s, plus very accurate satellite data over the last several decades. There has been a 20-centimeter increase in sea level since 1870. The rate of rise is increasing. This will result in war. There's a 100% probability that some psychopath will crawl out of its butt and use this situation to its own advantage. Think about the economic collapse of Germany and the rise of Adolf Hitler. This will happen again. Number 2 may appear to be true, but it isn't. The frequency of storms in the U.S. is not rising. The strength isn't either. What is increasing is the news media's coverage of the storms. The 1880s and 1960s saw more hurricanes than we see today. We also saw more Category 3 plus hurricanes from 1931 to 1960 than we do today. As far as number 3 is concerned, let's create a scenario. If we have dirt with nitrogen, potassium, potash, and other goodies in it, a little water, some sunlight, maybe some temperatures that are nice, and some carbon dioxide, we'll have plants. We have an environment that favors plant growth. That's the good news. The bad news is that trees are now growing in areas that were inhospitable several decades ago. Trees are growing in northern Russia and Canada where it was previously impossible because the ground was permanently frozen. Since 1982, an area the size of Texas and Alaska combined is now covered in trees. This doesn't mean that climate change is fake news. It means that the model has to accommodate the new data. The original temperature experiment occurred in a box, and that box didn't have any oceans or plant life in it. The experiment and its results are valid. How we apply the equation isn't. There are roughly 1.5 billion vehicles on Earth. Predicting the effect these vehicles have on our environment with any degree of accuracy is nearly impossible. The same can be said for the effects of over 3 trillion trees. Our system is capable of adjusting to change in input conditions. We have to adjust and balance our priorities to match reality. That won't be easy. Presently, we're making food and electrical production more expensive, and that affects people who make less money. That type of solution is going to backfire very badly. We need to come up with a better way of dealing with the CO2 problem.